Okay, so can we start? Hello, everyone. Welcome to our JFF March workshop. This time we have a bit change in our regular schedule. We are not going for a paper workshop this time. Rather, we are going for a discussion on how to go about a career in academia. A lot of us face this question while we are starting off our career, what to do, what not to. We have three important panelists today who will be discussing on this. We have Professor Tarunabh Khaitan, Dr. Dinesha Samararatne, and we have Ms. Swati Jhaveri from Animesh. So all these three panelists will be taking up. Before that, just a regular introduction of our JFF, our Junior Faculty for Indian Law Teachers. We deal with mainly guiding young scholars on writing papers and how to go about in their early careers. And this is just an addition to that, how to go about in your career life. I'll just put this over to Professor Khaitan for the discussions. I'm sorry, to Swati Jhaveri. Yeah, to Mrs. Jhaveri.
Thanks, Animesh. So welcome everyone to the session today. So yeah, like Animesh said, we're doing something a little bit different this month. We just thought it would be a good idea to just share some thoughts we all have had as we've kind of wandered this mysterious path of academia. And in sharing our thoughts, hopefully open up a discussion with looking into questions you might have as you're either contemplating academia or just sort of in a place where you're thinking a little bit more strategically or intentionally about what you want to do next in your career. So perhaps I can start off by saying that everything that we're going to share today is just an example of one possible way of thinking about your career in academia. There is definitely not a one size fits all. So if I look at my own background, I'm not sort of your conventional academic career path because straight after my undergraduate, I went into practice first for a couple of years before I went to do my master's. And after my master's, I didn't go straight on to a doctorate program. I went to teach for a couple of years, and I've only just started my doctorate 2 years ago. So there really isn't a one size fits all approach. Sometimes what you're trying to do is fit a career around life, and life is what dictates what happens next rather than a career choice that you might have access to. So that's just a preface for everything that all three of us are going to share. So for me, in my comments, I wanted to share just 7 things that I thought would be good headings to just put on a piece of paper and start populating and thinking about more clearly. So these are just random 7 things that I think a lot about when I'm making decisions when it comes to my career. So the first part is teaching. So a lot of you will have come with a lot of questions on the research side of things, but I think something that I found was really important for me to do was actually not get on top of research as an enterprise, but get on top of teaching as an activity of a scholar, because teaching is something that will just always be this additional call on your time. So the faster you get sort of comfortable with it, the faster you settle into your own teaching style, into your own teaching groove, the faster it can be the most efficient part of your job. Because as you'll find with research, it has the potential to sprawl as an activity, and it's very hard to contain it sometimes. So if you can try and contain the teaching part of your job and really just get on top of teaching as a skill and a craft, the less frustrating you might find the overall experience. So that's the first kind of remark I had, was just teaching. The second thing I found was really helpful to get on top of early on in my career was public speaking. So I absolutely do not like public speaking. I always, no matter what, get super nervous, including now. before I start public speaking. So I really have to sort of build myself up before I speak to an audience. So another thing I found was just really good to get on top of was public speaking. So as painful as it was, very early on, I just forced myself into different public speaking contexts, just again to get on top of it, because the faster you get on top of it, again, the more efficient it can become as an exercise, and the more space you free up to that big black box that is research. So teaching, public speaking, those are things that I thought I better get on top of fairly early on in my career. The third thing is to start thinking about your narrative and your research area. So we've had a lot of questions come in on this. So perhaps I'll leave the bulk of what I'm going to say in response to the Q&A. But what I want to say at this stage is the criteria I use to decide on my research area. The biggest criteria was enjoyment. Does it genuinely interest you? Now, with genuine interest, you also have to be practical. So you can be interested in many, many things, but it will be very difficult to get on top of many, many things. So you really have to go through a big soul-searching exercise to figure out what is that interest, and is it a sustainable interest? And also, is there something you can say, you can bring your voice to into a field that you're interested in? Now, there are lots of sub-questions to that, but I'm going to leave that for the time being to the Q&A, because lots of you, I'm sure, will have questions on that. But for me, it was interest, and can I add anything to this particular area? So that's my third thing: teaching, public speaking, research area. The fourth thing is, so I'm a mother, and they say it takes a village to raise a child. I feel the exact same thing about an academic's career. To really build up your research and your teaching, you really need to find your village. Now, who your village is, these are people you commonly go to just sound off ideas, frustrations, struggles, roadblocks, whatever you have it, people you go to. Now, some of them can be in a senior mentoring role, but something you find is that it can get very lonely if you just have a lot of seniors on top of you and you don't have any contemporary people, sort of people who are your peers to speak to. So when I think of network, I think of sort of a 360-degree network. I want people who are senior and ahead of me in the field, but I also want people who are going through the exact same struggle as me. So I actually have someone I can speak to without needing to censor myself, because I'm speaking to someone who I'm also trying to sort of, like how I'm trying to say respect me as well. So your village is going to be this 360-degree circle that you develop, and it's really important to find one. Or to think about who those people are going to be and how you might want to connect with them. And how you might want to connect with them is a much bigger point, so we can cover that in Q&A. So teaching, public speaking, research area, your village. The fifth thing I wanted to talk about was work ethic and discipline. So research, because it's you can be researching 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is no end to research. Unfortunately, nobody wants to be working those kinds of hours. So something else I found was quite important to do is to try and build up a sense of discipline when it came to research. Because with teaching, the discipline is sort of forced on you, because you have to go into a class at 9 a.m. You have to be ready for it. Research doesn't have the same kind of deadlines for you. So two things I always do is I always start my day with writing. Even if it's 20 minutes is the only window I have, I write in those 20 minutes. And that's something I've always done. I don't look at emails or anything else. I always start my day with writing. The other bit of discipline is I always read something new every week. So I always write every day and I always read every day. And it may not be huge amounts of time, but just to have those sort of punctuated bits of discipline in your day and your week, I have found to be very useful for me. So teaching, public speaking, research area, your village, work ethic, discipline. The last two things I want to talk about are the softer side of academia. So the first is this nebulous idea of work-life balance. How do you get work-life balance? And something someone said to me has always stuck. There is no perfect equilibrium point when it comes to work-life balance. The better way I have found to ask myself the question is, how much of my life do I want work to be a part of? And in my 20s, I had complete independence in answering that question. Right now, I have a partner who answers that question for me, and she is an 8-year-old child. So she dictates how much time I can actually put into work. So you're going to find the answer varies a lot, and you have to have a lot of flexibility and change with work-life balance, but it's something to constantly ask yourself. Is academia has this potential to be very intense and all-consuming? Do you always want to live in that all-consuming state of mind? The last thing I wanted to talk about is in academia, you don't really have the same checks and balances on behavior that you sometimes see in the private sector. Because in the private sector, you interface with clients, and with clients, you have to be nice. Whereas in academia, you don't really interface with clients as such. So you may not have the same checks and balances on behavior. But something I found is that it's really important to think about how to also be a good citizen within academia. So how do you want to not only be known in terms of yourself as a teacher and a researcher, but how do you also want to be known as a person? And the reason this is important is because academia is made up quite a bit by way of collaboration. There's a lot of collaborative research work that goes on. And sometimes people really think of intellectual mind out there if they're not at the same time a good colleague to work with. So my 7 things are teaching, public speaking, research area, your village, discipline, your personality.
Animesh, should I start now? Swati, you went mute towards the end. Yeah, okay. So let me start. Thanks, Animesh, for giving us this opportunity. And thank you also to Swati Singh Parma and Tavini for doing all the background work to make this discussion possible. I must say I'm delighted to be having this conversation with 2 very dear colleagues, Swati Jhaveri and Tarun. And look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. So I couldn't emphasize Swati's opening remark more. We all come at this differently, and we are all different as well, and we work in different contexts. So 7 seems to be the magic number this evening. Independent of Swati, I had identified 7 areas that I want to flag as areas of significance that I think about, and which I would like to suggest for you to consider as well as you either join academia or continue as an academic. And depending on where you are in life at a given moment, one area might be more challenging or the other area might be more significant. So this is not in a particular order as such. So the first is, I think, your career itself. And just by way of introduction and also to give you some context to where I'm coming to this conversation. In my first year of the study of law itself, perhaps largely influenced by the fact that both my parents were teachers, I was quite drawn to the idea of teaching law, although I still, in my mind, think about practicing law, and perhaps, who knows, I might do that at some point formally. Right now, in Sri Lanka, law academics are not permitted to practice law. So I joined academia soon after, and in those first 5 years completed my master's and came back to Sri Lanka. And at that point, and I'm saying this only because it may be useful for somebody, so I did my master's on a Fulbright scholarship at Harvard. And the choice was whether to seek overseas opportunities for a PhD position or do it differently. And at that time, my father was very ill. So I chose to remain in Sri Lanka, and I chose to pursue my PhD studies in Sri Lanka, fully conscious of the implications of that. But now, almost 10 years later, I am pleased to say that I am very happy with the decision I took, because 2 years into my PhD studies, my father passed away. So I'm glad that I made that choice in the way that I did. I completed my PhD around 2014 and continued to teach in Sri Lanka. And by coincidence, I visited Melbourne Law School as a visiting fellow. And there I met Tarun, who has been a colleague and a mentor to me since then, who really did push me to seek a postdoctoral fellowship at the Melbourne Law School. And that's where I was 2019, 2020. And again, I sort of chose to come back to Sri Lanka, where I am. So that I have followed thus far. And I think I need to be honest in saying that it's not rare for me to ask myself whether I'm doing the job that I should be doing, and whether I have the energy and the vision to sustain the work that I'm doing at the moment. So I think it's also good to sort of approach work with an open hand so that you don't feel trapped. That's the first area. The second area, which overlaps with what Swati had said so far, is about research. Here, again, much can be said, but I will just say two things. As you start off in your career, you may be passionate about a particular area of law, but as law academics, I think at least at the early stages, it's important to expose yourself to different aspects of the law as far as possible, because that can inform the way in which you eventually think about your chosen area of specialization. And of course, if you're in a context like that of Sri Lanka or any other South Asian jurisdiction, you may also have the opportunity to engage in field research, partner with non-governmental organizations, engage in consultancies, and I would encourage you to pursue those pathways because it has multiple benefits. One of which is that you also get to study law as it functions in society. And as you go along in your career, that has a way of informing the way you think about your research, but also approach your research. So I'm grateful that I had that exposure, and up to 2009, Sri Lanka was in conflict, and there were a whole range of areas in which I undertook research, which I think gave me a strong foundation within which I could understand my role as an academic in this context. So that's the second area. Third area, again, overlaps with what Swati said, is about community. And in community, there is the whole aspect of collaboration. And collaboration can be with your local sort of colleagues in your department or faculty, colleagues from your university, but outside of your discipline, and then of course internationally. And I think that's one area in which I have been really fortunate in having colleagues very often who are ahead of me in my career, willing to come and collaborate with me. And that has been an opportunity for me to flourish, because it has been it's just been an opportunity for growth for me. So I think if you are invited to collaborate with somebody, it's always good to try and say yes as far as possible, because it's a good opportunity to learn. The fourth area has three sub-themes. I won't speak to all three. I'll just flag them for you. It's about our context. And for each of us, that will be something different. But the political context, the material context, and what I sort of describe to myself as the epistemological context. So just one example about the political context. If, like me, you have been working in a society which has been in conflict, you may be often required to respond to a crisis. So very often you're in crisis mode. As the law changes, as sort of the law is confronted with new realities, you have to interpret the law, you have to write about it, you have to engage with it, you have to give your opinion. And that can take up a lot of your emotional, intellectual, and physical energy. And then the core areas of your work as an academic, that of teaching, that of assessment, that of research, etc., can be impacted. So it's something I think I have been fairly conscious of. The material context in a South Asian university environment is something I don't think I need to go into, but again, it has a real impact on our work, but also how we perceive our role as academics. The by epistemological context, what I mean is sort of the theoretical work or scholarship in general that we engage with. In my personal experience, I have had moments where I've read something and felt frustrated by what I've read because either I couldn't understand it because my training was weak, or because I felt it was irrelevant to me, or I felt like it had ignored certain experiences that I understood to be true. So it's a area that we need to discuss at some point in more depth, but that's another aspect to our context that I think we need to be mindful of. So those are the three sub-themes under 4. 5 is impact. So how do you think about impact as academics? Here again, I think we are spoiled for choice. Earlier, I would have started with students, but I think now I will start with self. It's a journey in which you're constantly sort of being humbled by how much you realize how human and vulnerable you are, and how limited you are in what you can do. You have one life, 24 hours a day. So you really have to think carefully about where you choose to channel your energies. Students remain the most sort of important area in terms of impact for me. And having been in academia since 2005, I've seen that impact. And I'm not only talking about students who are quote unquote successful in their career. So that is, I think, a really special part of the work that we do. And then, of course, your research work. But research work, again, needs to be understood broadly. The types of writing you engage. And I've said this before, I think sometimes that newspaper article you write might be of far more consequence than a journal article that you may write. So it's important not to limit your sort of restrict yourself to a certain static hierarchical notion about the kind of writing we do as an academic. The institutional reform that you contribute to, the institutional design that you get engaged with would also be important, because that may survive you after you leave the institution. And then we all have roles as public intellectuals in our chosen area of expertise, but more broadly as general. The last 2 points, workflow management, I think I'll leave it for a discussion later. And the final point, the 7th area, is well-being. So I took my sabbatical leave to go to Melbourne for my postdoctoral fellowship. And it took me about 8 months to purge my system of all the tension that I had carried with me because of all the kind of, not just work, but sort of the way in which I had lived my life. And like I said, I've been humbled by that experience to realize that if I neglect my sense of well-being, I will face the consequences of it, and face it quite quickly. So I'll leave it at that for now. Over to you.
Thank you, Dinesha. Thanks a lot. Now we request Professor Tarunabh Khaitan to Professor Khaitan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Animesh. So thanks for organizing this panel, and I'm really grateful for the insights that Swati and Dinesha have already shared and helped me to build upon them. There are obviously points on which we disagree, and I, in part a provocation, in part an illustration of the importance of Swati's opening about, there are many parts, and sometimes they're conflicting parts. I will explicitly disagree with at least one point, but we'll get there eventually. So I want to say 3 things broadly. I want to talk about the point of the academy. Why should we seek to become academics at all? I want to talk about citizenship, being a good citizen in the academy. And finally, I want to talk about research. So, and obviously there's a lot else to what makes an academic life, but, and these are, obviously personal insights. These are things that have worked for me, things that I've figured out. I know that people think about them very differently, but at least some of the things I'm going to say are also motivated by a background concern about well-being in academy, because it's one way to think about this is how I think about religion. So I'm not religious, but I know that a lot of people find great strength and solace in being religious, and to my mind, if I was able to trick myself into believing, I would be really happy to do that. It's rational to believe, even if you think it's not true, right? So, and of course, if you're religious, then you obviously subscribe to some beliefs of your religion. Anyway, so some of the things, even if they seem untrue to you, treat them as maybe prescription, right? Things that will be useful to believe in, irrespective of their truth value. And things will become clearer, hopefully, once I explain what I mean by. But let me start by why the academy. I think that a lot of people end up in the academy because we want to do good. We want to change the world. We want to, not everybody ends up in academy with those ideas, but a large number of academics end up in scholarship because of its public spiritedness. It's a vocation. It's not just another job, and that is attractive to what is good in us as human beings. The difficulty that raises is that it's the same impulse that also attracts us to activism and to fight for justice in the real world. And I think Dinesha's comments obviously made some of that conflict quite apparent. I'm a great believer in keeping the academic and the activist separate. Right? I have them both in me, but I keep them in different compartments, and I have no doubt that I'm an academic first and foremost. And that if I allow the activist to take over, I'll be a worse academic and a really bad activist. And I believe that because I think that the ultimate goal that the academic seeks is different from the ultimate goal of the activist. The academic ultimately seeks truth. The scholar is someone who wants to find out what happened or what is true. The activist seeks justice. In the long term, they meet, but in the short term, the activist often will find certain shortcuts to justice by bending the truth attractive, and the scholar has to resist that. It's a corruption of our vocation if we try to get to truth using a shortcut, which is why this impact agenda is so dangerous. Because if you start writing your work based on how you will influence the next case outcome or what difference you'll make in the real world, you're thinking like an activist, getting to justice, and sometimes that will compromise your truth-seeking mission. So the time horizons are very different. This is not a rant against activism, by the way, right? It's a very respectful vocation too. But if you choose to do that, choose to do that. And the activist in me requires me to choose topics that I think are socially relevant and to translate my academic work for a broader audience at a later point, having written them. And this is again a point of disagreement from Dinesha, because I think that my scholarly work must first come out in journal articles or a monograph. Op-eds, it's great to engage in public debate, but only, and I don't think Dinesha will really disagree because I've not seen her writing an op-ed on a topic she's not an expert on. But translate your scholarship into an op-ed later for the general public but there is a problem of becoming an expert of everything. But the idea of knowledge, the idea of expertise, the idea of what you're good at becomes irrelevant if you have an opinion on everything, by all means. But that's what Twitter is for. Don't start spouting them as an expert if you haven't worked on it. And it doesn't matter how many years you've spent in the academy. Nobody can be an expert on very many things. One lifetime is simply not enough. So that's the first thing on why choose to be an academic, and always remembering to choose why you do this, right, is important to me. Now, here is the first sort of religion-like truth that I think is good to believe, whether or not it's true, which is most people in the academy are nice. I believe in it, but even if you don't believe in it, it's good for you to believe in it, because it will mean that you will be less cynical. You will not be perpetually angry. You will try, when people do things you find it difficult to appreciate or understand, you will try to find the most generous interpretation of that anger. And not being cynical, not being angry, not being perpetually angry is good for you. It's good for your scholarship. It's good for your personality. It's good for your peace of mind, and it's good for your mental health. So if you can believe in the fact, as I see, that most people are genuinely nice, people who choose to be academics are motivated by good causes, do so. If you can't believe in it, fake it, because it's good for you. The second problem which an academic life creates is that we are probably the only profession in the world that goes out on a limb to invite criticism. Human beings are programmed to not like criticism, right? But we are the only vocation that spends money and effort, sometimes months, if not years of effort, to invite other people to publicly criticize us. That's hard. Get over it, get used to it quickly, become robust. Because I have seen many excellent people just being destroyed by self-doubt and insecurity. And it's not surprising, you know, we are human beings and we don't like to be criticized, and our vocation demands criticism. It thrives on criticism. So it's important to start seeing criticism as service. And I'm moving into my second theme now, which is citizenship, right? Receiving criticism and giving criticism is key to the life of a scholar. And they are both skills that need to be honed and learned. And in part of my motivation for starting the JFF was to hone both those skills, which is, you know, month after month, we see how to give criticism and we see how to receive criticism. It is service, even when it is given unfairly, even when it's given angrily, even when the critic did not read you properly, even if they are being extremely harsh and unfairly harsh. Even then it's service, because they are being generous with the time to anonymously usually respond to your work for no pay and no recognition except the private thanks of a journal editor. In the harshest of critic, and learn from it, right? That when you give criticism, do it kindly. Right? Criticism can be substantively robust and still be given kindly. In fact, the more robust your criticism, greater the importance of doing so kindly. Right? You have to change cultures, and you have to change a culture of making sure that you attack is a strange word, criticize the idea, not the person, right? But also being generous with your time. Organize workshops, accept review requests, organize reading groups. There are few joys greater than reading in a group of intelligent, like-minded people. You see things you will never see reading alone. So citizenship is extremely important, especially in the context of the Global South, where we have not inherited sound, robust institutions, where we can take even the fundamentals of academic life for granted. In some ways, ours is a generation that has been tasked with building those fundamentals, putting them in place for future generations. And therefore, it's impossible to be a good scholar in the South Asian context without taking the citizenship duties very seriously, to build capacity in others And if you're a great scholar, there's no greatness in being a lone rider, right? We have had 60 years since Indian independence, at least. I can speak for India, where we've had star scholars who didn't create communities of scholarship. They were lone riders, and this is not a complaint against them. They probably did not have the resources that would have enabled them to do so. But now we've reached critical mass. We have the opportunity to create communities of scholarship, and that is really essential. So, so the same message here on the second front, which is kindness pays. So, and that might be strange to hear, kindness pays, but be kind if you are kind. If you're not, be kind because it's strategically good for you. Being nice to others leads to good things. You're recognized as a capacity builder, as a good citizen, and that will open doors for you. So being selfish, being extremely sort of jealous of your time, of only writing your material, for example, I think it's a bad model for scholarship, but it's bad for you. You're just not going to, well, exceptions obviously exist, but I think kindness is strategically good for you. So two claims so far, which is try to believe that people, at least in the academy, are generally good, and second, that kindness pays. Finally, on research, if you're not doing good original peer-reviewed research, if we don't do it as scholars, we are failing in our mission as academics of creating and disseminating new knowledge. That is the point of us. Yes, teaching is part of the dissemination of that new knowledge. But if we fail to create new knowledge as well, we are failing in our role as academics. And that's why I think that journal articles, peer-reviewed material is essential. The standards of our community that justify what counts as good scholarship. It has to be rigorous. It has to go through the process of the criticism of our peers before it can be published in ways that op-eds cannot be. And this was my point of departure from, perhaps not necessarily disagreement, but a footnote to Dinesha's claim. That research is different from advocacy. I've already made this point, so I'm not going to belabor it. Now, there are two main worries about research, which I want to highlight, and then I'll end on a practical note. As wearing my editor hat of the Indian Law Review, there are two research pathologies that I have seen in the last 4 years of papers we get from the subcontinent. The first is, well, allow me three actually. The first is trying to answer all of the world's problems in one paper. Right? This is a problem of every bright early career scholar. You have been bubbling with ideas for so long, 10, 15 years in the academy. Finally, you're writing something you try to possibly think of in one paper. The paper cannot simply bear the weight of so many ideas. It falls. And the journal rejects it and says, look, sharpen this, pick up one idea, go deep, not broad. Right? That's good advice. You have a lifetime ahead of you. Hone your ideas. Don't try to do too much in one paper. Second is the derivative work that is all too common in the South Asian context, which is you've done your undergraduate in a South Asian university, you go to the US or the UK to do your master's or your PhD, and then you pick up an American framework that has been generated in the American context. You completely unself-consciously apply that to a Sri Lankan or a Nepali or an Indian problem, and voila, I have an article. That is pointless scholarship. It'll probably be rejected by a good peer-reviewed journal. You might get it published in, somewhere, but think about your material, think about your scholarship, and not because it's yours, but because the American frame has not been designed based on the Indian circumstances or the Pakistani circumstances. It may be useful, right? but do it critically, reflectively. So that derivative scholarship, engage, but engagement is different from derivative application. When you have a rockstar supervisor who is this big American professor, you basically apply their big ideas to solve every problem in the world. No matter how big a rockstar they are, they probably haven't thought about every big problem in the world. The third key research advice I'll give is to not reach out to the normative too quickly. This is again, the activist in early career scholars who keep getting to the should far too quickly without waiting on the is. Let's figure out what is before we get to what ought to be, what should be. Right? So maybe not your first paper, maybe not your second paper, maybe your 10th paper. I think a lifetime in scholarship can be well spent just asking what is and never getting to what ought to be, but certainly not in your first paper. I think that's extremely worrying because getting to what ought to be too quickly can actually be quite dangerous in understanding and knowledge dissemination. And finally, the practical question of the subcontinental context, because there are many institutions in the subcontinent, many universities that simply do not provide a space for research, where you are bogged down by unnecessary and mind-numbing admin, where you have to mark hundreds, if not thousands of papers, where you have enormous number of teaching hours pointlessly spent. So the students are not particularly well served by numerous exams, multiple writing projects that nobody has the time to read or mark anyway. And it is dissipating, it saps energy. I don't know. There isn't an easy answer to that. And, not everybody can just find a job at Jindal. But it's important to start that conversation with like-minded peers in your institution, carve out a space, even if a small space, commit to writing one paper in 2 years, 10,000 words. That's okay. But serious scholarship. And it's a battle to be fought over time. Changing institutions is not easy. Changing vested interests challenging them to see the point, or just waiting out until they retire is not easy. But it's a difficult problem. A forum like JFF exists precisely to address that question. But be conscious of that and don't let it suck you. Try to get visiting fellowships if you can, to find some peace of mind, as Dinesha said, to detox and to go outside and get some distance, because emotional distance is also extremely important. When your activism can, in some cases, literally save lives, it's very hard to justify to yourself the point of working on an article. It seems like a luxury, right? But you're playing the long game. There are different things to do, and neither of them is automatically more valuable than the other. But they're different things, and that's important to recognize. So stop there. Thank you. Over to you, Animesh.
Thank you, Professor Khaitan. That's really something that we're looking for. But taking with one of your very important observation, that we can write 2 papers in 2 years, but maybe of 10,000 words and publish it in some good place. We have a very relevant question from one of our own, Swati. She's asking, very few universities value quality research, and almost all pressurize teachers with unrealistic timelines. We have a system of API scoring here in India for publications, making it as an overwhelming task. And how do we deal with that? We want the universities want us to publish 2 papers a year in some listed peer-reviewed journals, and that is something too tough after going through a lot of co-curricular, curricular, and academic activities. How do you advise us to go about it?
I don't know if Dinesh or Swati have anything to say on that. I do, but I'm happy to wait. Or let me answer, and then if you want to come in. I don't know how you want to do it after this, Animesh, whether you're taking a few questions at a point or one. Anyway, let me answer this one first, which is, I just think that Indian and probably others, I say Indian because I don't know the context outside of India particularly well, but I suspect that in all these jurisdictions, we need a union of academics who can do collective bargaining to make better terms of employment that allow you to act as an academic, to fulfill your vocational duties, which means a reasonable teaching load, a reasonable admin load, and a reasonable research load. And I think the JFF has the potential to evolve into a union of sorts, where you can use that as a forum for a lot of other contexts, like in Europe, have something called young academies. These are basically associations and unions that do advocacy for early career academics. But that's what I mean by the burden of your generation. You have to make institutional change. That'll be hard. So you have a fourth task, not just the three academic ones. But yeah, if it's unrealistic, you have to fight it.
I'm sorry, I just got into the questions before giving a short declaration to all our participants. If you have questions, please drop in the chat box. I can read it out to our panelists, or you can simply raise your hand and then you can try saying the questions. Our panelists will be happy to take it. We will try to distinguish and differentiate between three types of questions, because our panelists have chosen rightly. One is on research, the other one is work-life balance, and finally some regulatory problems. Yes, we have Tulasi K. Raj raising hand. Yes, Tulasi, can you please let me? Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Tulasi? Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Hi, Tarun, Swati, and Dinesha. It was turning out to be a very, very useful session. I have two questions. I'll try to be as quick as possible. And the first is relating to the political context in which we are working, at least in India. And we know that we are currently having a very precarious political context. And it has become very dangerous to be an academic and to write openly and freely. And my first question is, how do you as an academic deal with challenges which are beyond your control, which relate to particular socio-political aspects? My second question is relating to how, as an academic, you can keep motivating yourself, since the results of academia, it seems take a long time to sort of deliver itself. And as you were saying earlier, that it takes indeed a lot of time to get your first publication out, perhaps a couple of years into as an early career scholar. And till then, you need to tell yourself and promise yourself that you are good enough to continue in this path. And my question is, how do you continue to do that over a period of several years?
Dinesha, Swati, do you want to take either of them?
Maybe. And
Should we take more questions?
Oh, let's collect. Yeah, because Animesh, I think we have quite a few questions. Yeah. So let's collect and then we can.
Okay. So the next one comes from Dr. Priyanka Jawale. She's asking, the research culture is not established. Only few reachable senior faculties are around who are publishing scholarly. Most of them are busy in fulfilling API criteria. The group team writing is missing, where you have multidisciplinary writings. What to do in such cases while working in multidisciplinary areas? We have another question. Just let me scroll down. Yeah. We have another question from Aditi Richa. She is asking more of a regulatory question that we have with respect to UGC. She's asking if teaching and research are different engagements and both demand different parameters of judgment. Why do UGC regulations judge the research aspect of teachers more than the ability to teach? Is it the time to revisit such regulations? The next one comes from S. Juanita, lecturer from Faculty of Law, Colombo University. As I am at the early stage of my career as an academic, I find difficulty in balancing work with personal life. I would like to seek advice from the team. So far, can we go ahead with all the three questions right now?
Okay, so Dinesha, would you like to take the academic freedom question?
Yeah.
So I'd like to speak to Dulce's second question about how to keep yourself going, especially when the first publication takes so long to get out. What you're going to find, or I hope you'll find the same experience as I had, which is you build up momentum as you go along. So it's really slow going in the first tranche, because in addition to writing, you're also getting on top of a literature base. And that can just take so long to synthesize masses of literature, inform your view on the literature, and then react to it. But what you'll find is that once you've built up your literature base, then you don't have to do that work again for your second paper, for your third paper. So slowly this momentum starts building up, which is also why I think having some sense of your research area and how to kind of ring fence the literature you're engaging with early on can be a really good efficiency tool to have. Because if you, which is a mistake I made, I felt I was sprawling a lot in the literature very early on. And so it was becoming very frustrating because I was actually having to keep on top of almost 4 or 5 different threads of literature before I figured out that my main transactional literature is thread 1 and not the other 4 threads I was trying to do. So I think there's a lot of flopping about in the literature early on that happens to figure things out, and then the momentum starts building. So there's no like, how do you keep yourself going? But I guess being really aware of literature you're dealing with and getting on top of it early can be a good tool or a good kind of hack for speeding up the process as you get further along in the writing.
I'm going to quickly just respond to that, because I think that you should all make the mistake that Swati made. It's to be all over the place. And I very much doubt that Swati would have been as brilliant and amazing and insightful as she is if she wasn't so well read. And this in part connects to Priyanka's question in the chat, but also, you know, don't worry about what others are doing or not doing. Worry about what you are doing or not doing. We are in a field where there is very little work happening anyway. Read, and then read some more, preferably in community. And then if you have an idea, start writing about it. But, you know, in the South Asian context, I think narrow reading is not a luxury that most of us can afford. So I would actually disagree with Swati's advice and say that, you know, you should be like Swati. So do as Swati does, not as Swati says. There was a second question about UGC guidance. I don't know. You have to do the minimum required to satisfy regulatory criteria. And that's just tough because, you know, that's what life is, and you have to make all sorts of compromises. My own view is that every scholar should be writing. That it is a loss if all you're doing is transferring knowledge. Important though it is, teaching is important, but you have to. It's a loss. There's an opportunity cost to somebody who knows so much, who's not adding to a knowledge base. And in contexts where there is so little knowledge, we can't, that's a luxury that we cannot afford.
I'm going to disagree with Tarun a little bit, but I'll leave that for later. But to respond to the important question, Tulasi, about academic freedom. So you have to understand there's what I can say in public and there's what I can't say in public. So what I can say in public, I can say in 3 ways. The first is to understand the scope of our academic freedom well. And here I couldn't recommend more the chapter on academic freedom by Adrian Stone and Carolyn Evans. It's coming out in a book end of this month. It's one of the best pieces I've read on academic freedom because it really clarifies our role as academics, and that speaks to what Tarun explained earlier about mastering our methods, being very clear about our methodology, and then contributing to knowledge. If we are able to be confident about that mode of work, even if we are challenged on what we have published, we will be able to defend the basis on which we've said what we've said. And hopefully we would also have at least a small number of scholars in our own jurisdiction, but also beyond, who will also be able to do that on our behalf. So that's the first point. The second point is to look in each jurisdiction, there will always be a few scholars who've had the same problem that you're faced with, maybe 10 years ago. And you need to establish links with them in order to understand how they navigated those challenges at that point in time. And then you also need to build relationships laterally so that when you do write something and when you're unsure about how it will be misunderstood, you are able to give it to them and ask them to read it with that same critical eye so that they will be able to help you to reorganize, reformulate, and write in a way that will help you to avoid unnecessary minefields. But I think, end of the day, if academic freedom is under threat, academic freedom is under threat. Sometimes that's something that one has to learn to live with as well. I'll leave it at that. Tarun, I'm thinking aloud here, and I'm really not very confident that this is the way I would be thinking about this in another 2-3 years. But I want to push back on this whole research or teaching dilemma that we often have. So often we are told that research is perhaps important, but what we can actually do with the resources we have is teaching. And I wonder whether so thinking about myself, sometimes I ask myself, well, what is it that I can do with what I have? And if teaching a certain subject in a particular way that will open up my students' minds is what I can do and do well, maybe sometimes I need to make my peace with it and not be able to produce knowledge in the way that I would actually like to, but I'm unable to. So ideally, research and teaching complement, but I wonder whether in certain contexts, research and teaching pull away from each other too. I understand your concerns about the need to produce knowledge, but my personal experience sometimes has been I felt disappointed in myself for not being able to produce knowledge in a manner that is globally acceptable and accessible, and often lost a fair bit of energy as a result of that frustration. So sometimes I do wonder whether we could think differently or creatively about teaching in such contexts. I'll leave it at that. We also have a question about work-life balance. Swati, do you want to have a go at that, or Tarun?
I want to quickly respond, Dinesha, because I know that there are questions, but we'll do this again. It's okay, but I think this conversation is also an important one, right? Because we are thinking about it, and I think it's important to think the different concerns when you're thinking institutionally and thinking personally about the place of research, right? So thinking institutionally, and hopefully some of the people here will go on to become, big professors and vice chancellors and will change institutional cultures. But even as academics and students, you can change cultures, or even if slightly, right? I do think that institutionally, we have to acknowledge that research has to be enabled. Institutionally, you have to give space, you have to build capacities, and the JFF exists precisely for that purpose, to build research capacity. Bring your draft paper to us. We will help you workshop it, because we know that that capacity is not there in all contexts in India. At the personal level, Dinesh, I could not agree with you more that we do need to make peace. Sometimes if something is impossible to do, it doesn't matter how worthwhile it is. If you can't do it, you can't do it, right? I would love to have world peace and end poverty, but I can't do it, and I have to learn to live with the fact that there will be war and there will be poverty, right? Even while you're trying to do incremental things against it, and that's important. So while you're making your peace, don't just decide either to give up completely or to say, okay, I'll just write op-eds instead on issues that I don't know anything about. It's okay, obviously subject to the norms that you have to satisfy, to write one paper in 10 years, right? Think about it, keep reading, keep sending drafts to colleagues here and there and elsewhere. But not giving up, tenacity will eventually pay. And that one paper is more valuable than 500 op-eds, in my view, under-informed op-eds. So we don't disagree, I don't think. But Swati, I don't know if you want to take the work-life balance question.
Sure. So I'm going to just go briefly to some questions that we have built up on the list, including the work-life balance one. So, I mean, I'm afraid to say that for me, it's a constantly moving target, work-life balance, and sometimes work wins and sometimes work loses, and life wins, life loses. So it's really like, for those people who say they've balanced it, I'm always very suspicious and skeptical, because I'm like exhaustedly juggling all the time. I mean, I came on this call 37 seconds after putting my daughter to bed. It was super fine, super close in making the call. So, I mean, I'll tell you just some ways so that's why I built in that idea of just writing as soon as she goes to school. That's the first thing I do, because I know she's at school and that I will have that time to write before she gets home. So it's just, for me, I found the only way to do the work-life balance was to really be kind of hard on myself on discipline for when she wasn't around. Because when she's around, there is no work, there's only life. So that's just on the work-life balance. It's just, I know I don't have weekends, I don't have evenings. I have from 7:30 to 3, and that's all the time I have. So I know I'm gonna have to squeeze productivity out of myself. And don't think I'm this robot. I have some awful days where, you know, I just don't get things done. So I have to say I have a hit rate of about 40% on productivity, but you know, you're not going to win what I tell myself is I'm not going to win work-life balance. It's going to be something I'm constantly failing at. But once I realize I'm going to constantly fail at it, I don't feel as frustrated with myself, because I've decided I'm going to fail on work-life balance. But all I can do is have this aim of squeezing productivity out of the hours that I do have. So I'll just say what the questions are that I have on the list, so we can pick up on those. So one is the research culture question, which Tarun already spoke on. Another one is Danushka's question, a really important one, is how to deal with rejections, especially for publications. And that's a really good question. Ayushi had a question on, let me just read that out. How we manage work and thought flow once you've decided on your area of interest, what might be a good way to determine the topics. So that the broad question of how do you decide your research area? How do you deal with doubts in research and your early sort of stages of research? So Ayushi's in the middle, in her first year of her doctorate. How does she deal with the anxiety that comes with just being in the first year of your doctorate? And then before I go back to Animesh's questions, I'll just read out Santanu since I'm reading questions out. Santanu's question relates to collaboration. When and how do you decide whether or not you're going to collaborate? So research culture, rejections, collaborations, anxiety in early stages of research. And then Animesh, what were the questions on your list?
So we have something which matches here as well. It's a very important question that most of the PhD aspirants, they want to ask. How do you look for your choice and your scope? This is precisely when you are still trying to decide on your research area. People tell you to pick an area that you love. Is it advisable to pick an area with a lot of scope? Or is it advisable to learn to love something that you wish to?
I can take a first stab at some of them, if that's okay. So first is, research is a labor of love. So is teaching. Please, please, please don't start research into an area that you don't like. You know, it's just not worth it, because you're just adding. It's hard enough as it is, right? all the capacity problems, all the absence of culture, absence of a community, they're bad enough. And then adding on top of that a research topic that you've chosen because of some notion of its strategic merit, that this will help my career more than another topic, which I would rather do, is, this is maybe on this, along the same lines as, most people are nice and be kind to others. It is, do what you love, research on what you love. And actually, if you don't love the academy, don't be in it, because life is too short, right? And that's okay. That's not a mark of failure. So I would just say it's really important not to add to your, in some ways, in the analogy I'll use here is respect, right? Respect is a funny thing. The more you demand it, the more you seek it, the more you are seen to desperately want it, the less you get, right? And in some ways, strategic success in research, I have found it to be similar. The more you strategize about it and the more you think about how to make the more you want to study the field and figure out how everybody else is, what is the shortcut to success, the less likely you are to actually make it, right? All the three people, with all our disagreements that you have heard, I think it should be evident that we love what we do. And if it does not get you out of the bed, then maybe this is not for you, and that's okay, right? But you have to, this is, underpaid, sometimes politically dangerous, sometimes politically really dangerous, conflict driven, ridden, no capacity in your, no reward from your colleagues who don't understand what you're doing. Love has to be the main thing that drives it. The second is a disease in the academy that I'm just going to name, because I think that's also really important to name it, which is, it's called, and both Swati and Dinesha, by the way, suffer from it. Right? I don't suffer from it very much, but they do, and it's called perfectionism. It's also a gendered disease. It is a disease. It needs to be stamped out of the academy. But, this idea that you need to do everything perfectly is one of the biggest causes of scholars becoming so fragile and beating themselves up. Of course, it's gendered, because, men like me can just, be blasé about it and complacent and think, yeah, I can just speak on the fly and get away with it, right? And women are taught that they will need to work bloody hard, and even then, it will not be perfect. It will be actually quite bad, and then they beat themselves up about it. So of course, this is a generalization, of course, not entirely true, right? But perfectionism is a disease that needs to be stamped out. It can get in the way of doing many great projects have never seen light of day because their authors have been too perfect. So, so maybe this is sort of the most important advice that I'm going to give today, which is, important to others is kindness. Kindness to others is important. Even more important is kindness to self. And if you can't be kind to yourself in a job where you're likely to be your own main boss, you're going to become a slave driver, and the employee in you who's being managed by yourself is going to be extremely unhappy. You have to learn to be kind to yourself. It doesn't come easily. Even someone as great as HLA Hart had a nervous breakdown in his late life because he thought he wasn't good enough, right? This is 40 years after writing Concept of Law. So we are little human beings. This is, read Nightmare and the Noble Dream to see how rife anxiety and perfectionism is in the academy. But knowing the enemy within makes it easier to fight it.
Great. Okay. So that precisely answers a lot of questions that we have in the list. Just one question somebody has sent me. How does age matters with respect to a PhD position? So is it a problem if you apply for a PhD position with when you are quite aged, or it does not matter? It doesn't put a pressure in your application, an extra pressure. Maybe Dinesha or Swati or Professor Khaitan, anyone could
I can take the age question.
Yeah.
So I'm in my 40s and I'm starting a PhD with I think I've mentioned my daughter once or twice already because it's just really is the big thing that takes up most of my life. But no, there is absolutely no, I have not found age to be a barrier when you're applying. You might have challenges because when you're at a certain age, you might also be at a certain life stage. Where you're just dealing with another set of challenges that you weren't in your 20s. But broadly speaking, age is not a barrier, but it might pose other challenges. But to be honest, I found it a strength because I think if I did my doctorate in my 20s, it would be a very, very different experience in a negative way for me than it is in my 40s. I'm finding I have a little bit more wisdom about how to dissect material that I just didn't have in my 20s. So everything everyone said in my 20s was right. There was just, I couldn't find a place to disagree. Whereas I think in your 40s, you become a little bit more stubborn and strong-willed. So you have a little bit more sense of like where to disagree. So that's on age. Could I just go back to some of the questions from the previous? So one I wanted to pick up in particular was Santanu's question on collaboration. So I had two very different approaches to collaboration early on and now. Early on with collaboration, I tended to be more yes than no, because collaboration was just a way of figuring out who my village were going to be. Also, like Dinesha said, collaboration is just such a learning experience because you learn from so many different scholars. So I said yes more than I said no, just to get plugged into that learning experience. But now, I'm kind of being a little bit more discerning with collaboration because I want to make sure it doesn't deviate from what I'm naturally planning to do. Because too many deviations, it's very tempting to say yes to collaborations, but then too many deviations, they throw you off track and then it's very hard to maneuver yourself back. So it's a hard sweet spot to hit, but the criteria to think about is how much I'm going to learn, how much of a deviation is it going to be? Is there a significant opportunity cost to that deviation? And something that I also feel is very important. So like Tarun, I do believe that everyone in the world is good. And it's a healthy place to be in. But I have had experiences where I have been proven wrong as well. So I'm also learning that I need to be comfortable with the people that I'm collaborating with, because collaborations have their own challenges. So it's good to be around people who are generally positive and encouraging and are really good learning experiences to have. The other question I wanted to pick up on was Danushka's question about rejection. Rejection is very much something I still experience. I had a rejection today from a journal, and I'm now going to mourn for a week. And then I'm going to go back to that piece. And the first thing I'm going to do is send it to someone. I'm just going to send it as is to someone, because I find it very demoralizing to go to a piece that has just been rejected and try to fix it. I kind of want to send it to my village and grieve with them and whine to them and say, I got rejected, and then get a lot of sympathy. And then I want a huge bunch of constructive criticism from them. So my process is the 7 steps of grieving or whatever it is. But I never write after a rejection. I send that piece to a fresh pair of eyes. I find that a little bit less demoralizing. Another illness that academics have, perfectionism, and something else I'm sure a lot of people here will have, is something called imposter syndrome. So we all have tons and tons of hangups. You're not alone. We all have the anxiety. We all have the imposter syndrome. We all have very dark, dark days in academia. So just to let you know, no matter what stage of your career you're at, those days don't leave you. They stay with you. Okay, Animesh, back to you.
Yeah, I just lost one question.
Animesh, before you do that, a quick footnote to Swati, which is, I'm pretty sure this is how Swati meant it. when she said that after rejection, send your paper to your village. So she's not talking about sending it to another journal. I think it's really important to take the feedback that the rejecting journal has given to you, revise it. But what she's saying is there has to be, it's like getting over an ex, right? You have to bitch about them. And that is the point when they're the worst people in the world, and only your friends will, you know, your truest friend is not going to help you see nuance at that point and say, yeah, but they had their good points and their bad. No. They were not good people on both sides as present friend. That is the point when they are just terrible, awful people. You need that sympathy, you need that kindness, which is why having a village is important, but also their criticism, and also the importance of workshopping papers before you send it to anyone, right? Workshopping it in forums like the JFF, sending it to friends, reading it with your village, you know, will just make it a better paper. And rejection is a tiny bit less likely. It never stops coming. All of us get rejections, and it's just part of the process. You have to take it in your stride. I don't know any academic who hasn't faced rejection and continues to do so, whatever stage in their career. But Swati, please correct me if I've read you wrong, but I think that before you send it to a new journal, you must revisit the piece. Take your time, get over it. And once you're in the mental space to see it again, do so, but revisit it before you send it. Sorry, Animesh.
No,
That's
so if I
really
may
nice.
come in and add to what Swati and Tarun have said so far, also on Santanu's question about networking and how do you network if you feel awkward about it. I think, again, that's a common feeling, Santanu, and we are told that networking is important for academics. I myself am someone who really cringes at the thought of networking with people that I'm meeting for the first time. So I don't think it needs to be forced. I do think that if you attend the right kind of academic events and you are given the forum to speak about your interests, you will have the opportunity to exchange ideas with people who have similar interests. And it's those conversations that will then grow. Some may grow, some may not. And the ones that will grow will help you to develop good collaborations. And also, alongside of that, another theme that was sort of cutting across Swati's comments in particular was this question about time and stages in your life. I hadn't mentioned so far that I also have two children, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I think because of my particular sort of life story, it is only after I had children that I truly sort of experienced gendered social perceptions about what it means to be a woman and a mother. And that, alongside of these notions of success, sort of created a very difficult tension that I had to learn to manage. And I learned two things. I learned that there is 24 hours in a day and 7 days a week. I also learned that, as Swat said, she said, it's a moving goalpost, and that is so true. Each time you think you've adjusted. There was thunder and lightning, I'm sorry. Each time you think you've adjusted, you need to readjust. But it's important to understand that it's not about distributing your hours or your energies. It's about understanding the tensions that intersect in your life and making a choice as to what you're going to give your energies to. And if any of you, like myself and Swati, are responsible for raising children, I don't think you should undervalue that responsibility, but also undervalue the way in which that's going to impact your work as an academic. I mean, Tarun spoke to this notion of kindness, patience, having hope for a better world. I mean, if you have children at home, it's really an opportunity to practice and learn those ways of seeing the world, and then taking it with you to your work as well. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Animesh, I'm going to add yet another footnote to Dinesha, a helpful comment on networking. And there's another disease in the academy, which is talking too much. And I definitely have that disease. but please tolerate me. So I just want to say, well, by the way, this is my child. She is an 11-week-old little puppy, and she's just adorable. But on networking, right? It depends on how you see it. Networking can be a bad word. It's usually a bad word because it's thought of as self-serving, right? But you can also take delight in people and their work for their sake, and call it what you may. So this is just an illustration of my claim that kindness pays. When you talk to people, don't talk to them trying to think about what can I get out of them. And if you're in a conference room or a cocktail party, don't talk to people always looking over their shoulder to see who is the bigger name in the room I can attract and get attention of, rather than, invest in the person you're speaking to. Find out what makes them tick, find out what's interesting to them, and find out how you can help them, maybe, something you have read that they would like to read because they're interested in a topic, somebody they would like to know because they have common shared interests, right? And if that is your approach to, if I didn't have my puppy in my hand, I would do air quotes, but of networking, then all power to you. It's a good thing to be a networker. You can be an other regarding networker rather than a self-regarding networker. And that pays, trust me, strategically in the long term, it's better to be an other regarding networker. You will be more successful in your own work if you're an other regarding networker rather than a self-regarding one.
Okay, so that brings us almost to the end of our entire discussion. So there is a last question. It's more of a statement. Pramod Malik is asking, Professor Khaitan is an alumni of NLS. What about those who pass out from traditional law schools? Would you like to give them some basic suggestions on starting their research?
So the first thing I want to quickly
just a small addition to this. Why he's asking, the context is traditional law universities, they have a very confined syllabus which does not change for decades. So that's his primary point of concern. Over to you, Professor.
Pramod, I don't know what Dinesh and Swati want to add to this, right? But the NLS syllabus it doesn't teach you to do research either, right? I don't know of a law school in India, at least, which teaches how to do research at all. So this has to be self-taught. Our law schools are making us write a lot, but they're not teaching us how to write well, unless things have changed dramatically since, but I'm interacting with a lot of people now and I know that things haven't changed, right? So sadly, this is the skill that you will have to pick up during a master's or a doctoral degree, and also sadly, probably abroad. And we know that funding opportunities are limited. There are some places within the subcontinent that are beginning to offer genuine research training. They're still limited. And it's very hard to just start from scratch, right? But I would say if you're in that space where you haven't had the opportunities, a training in research, I would just say spend your time right now reading and learning in community with others. So build a culture of reading together while you wait for the right opportunity to come up where you can go and get trained, because research is not something that we are born with, and it's very hard to self-teach, right? It takes usually, to most people, a 3-year process of supervised learning by a supervisor, a mentor. And it's a complicated, difficult, tough process. So at least that's my view, that, it's not just, don't beat yourself up if you're not able to do research without any training. Of course you're not. It's like asking somebody to start swimming without learning that, or worse, right? Do sort of international Olympic level diving without having any training. So just be kind to yourself. Read in the meantime and keep looking for opportunities would be my advice, but don't beat you. I don't know if Dinesh or Swati want to add anything to that.
Just 2 things I'd like to add. Dinesha, is it okay? Yeah. So one is I also went to a traditional law school, which focused very much on black letter law and a very specific way of doing legal philosophy. And on leaving my law school, I realized just how diverse thinking about law is. So one thing I've started to do is I actually Google syllabuses from around different law schools, and I use those syllabi to read into my area again. So I'm now using a US-based reading list on administrative law, which is my main area of research, and using that to understand my area again from a very different lens. So that's one thing I do. The second thing, Tarun was talking about writing. So I'm reading a book. I'll send a link. I'll send a link to the information about this book. But I'm actually now looking at my writing itself and trying to figure out what are the bad habits in my writing and trying to resolve this. And this book gives a lot of different exercises to do, specifically on the skill of writing, that I think it's never too late to pick up on and fix. So I'll send a link about this book into the reading. But that's two things I'm doing, is reading around other law school syllabus and just figuring out writing, using different books that are well regarded on the art of writing, and just using that to hone my writing skills.
Just to add to what has been said so far on this question of research methods and methodology, if like myself, you have found yourself in a position where you don't have access to the latest books, you don't have a community that you can go to, you can still look for that one or two scholars who are accessible in your jurisdiction and try to reach out to them and ask for help. And chances are they might offer you help. If that is also not possible, then you have to pick up the confidence and start learning yourself. And that will give you two things. One is you will learn what the knowledge that you're seeking, and it will set you up well for the future, because you will develop confidence in thinking for yourself and making your own arguments, because you're really building yourself up from ground zero. And once you send your articles to good journals, you get good feedback. And if you follow the sort of the suggestions, that experience that Tarun and Swati shared, I think we can move a step at a time, but keep progressing over time.
Okay, so here we have come to the end of the program. So I'll just request Professor Khaitan, Swati Jhaveri, and Dinesha to, if you have any concluding remarks to make on the young academics who are either growing, who are trying to bud up in India, or those LLM students who are probably in their final years and about to start something, and they're in a dilemma whether to go for the academics or to start practicing. So just some concluding remarks if you have any to give, and then we'll close.
I just want to say that the JFF is one of those, it's a tiny space in the subcontinent in very challenging circumstances where you can get and give good, kind, but robust feedback, learn how to write, learn how to read in community, engage with the JFF and replicate it in your own institution, right? We can't possibly engage with all the papers that are being produced in such a large region, but 3 people is enough. Even 2 is enough, right? To make a start, to just say, here's an interesting book. Why don't we meet every 15 days and read a chapter? And I think that would be well begun.
I just want to repeat something that Tarun mentioned earlier. I mean, being in academia is something you must do only if it makes you wake up in the morning and think about your work with some sense of deep joy. And what we try to discuss today are different aspects that you need to think about in preserving and cultivating that joy. I think Tarun used the word love. So it's important to foreground that, that this is not really about work in a bare sense, but about work in the sense of human flourishing for ourselves and for the community that we are working for. Thank you.
Okay, Swati, anything?
Yeah, it was community. I think the thing that will sustain you. Sorry, Animesh. Sorry, there's a time lag. Sorry to interrupt. So echo everything Tarun and Dinesha said. Totally agree with it. I just want to reinforce the comment on community. I think academia don't make it as lonely as it can be. It can be as communitarian as you want it to be. So look around for different communities you can plug into, as small as they are. Just find your community, find your people, so you're not in this sort of lonely space the whole time. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to all the panelists, all the 3 panelists. It's an excellent discussion we had. I hope all the participants, they have actually learned a lot, and they had a lot of questions which are answered. Thanks once again for participating. We will be uploading our information regarding the April JFF soon. Please stay tuned. Thanks to the advisors whom we have, Professor Khaitan, Dr. Dinesha, Ms. Swati Jhaveri, and of course our excellent conveners. I don't know how excellent I am, but Swati Singh and Kavini, they're excellently doing it. Bye-bye. Good night.